What's up, witches? So it's kind of an addendum to the series that I just completed on the children of Loki and Angrboda. I've been really wanting to go back for a while now and do a kind of part 2 follow-up video all about working with Loki, because not only have I just personally had a lot more interactions and experiences with him since I made my first video on working with Loki. I think when I first made that video, I was still only a couple months in to the whole Norse paganism journey. Now, like I said, I've definitely had a lot more experience with Loki himself. Curiously enough, my video on why work with Loki I think remains perhaps the best performing video on my channel so far, since there seems to be still so much interest in that video even a year or more after I first made it. So I just really wanted to make a video all about my updated experiences on working with Loki. Am I a Lokian now? And what is working with him really all about, at least in my humble opinion? So let's get into it. The first thing that I want to address in this video, part 1 was all about why work with Loki. I wanted to address the question that I often see in the Norse pagan sphere of how work with Loki. And what I mean by that is I've sometimes seen people ask the question of, well, according to the myths, Loki is chained for all time beneath the earth in a cave, and he has been bound and stripped of all of his powers and booted out of Asgard. So if he's chained and therefore powerless, how are we in the current age even able to interact with him at all? So to that I would say that first, time is a flat circle. And therefore, I like to think that these events and beings, past, present, future, do not exist along a linear timeline as we currently perceive it, but instead that perhaps all of these events are happening everywhere all at once. And so, while there is a current version of Loki that might be bound and chained, there is also a version of Loki out there somewhere in the past or future that was not bound and chained. And perhaps that version, that free version of Loki, is the one that we are interacting with. My other argument to that would be to use a nerdy example, as I am often fond of doing. Let's use the example of perhaps one of my favorite villains in all of video game history, Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII. In that game, Sephiroth, for all intents and purposes, by the time that the game takes place, is dead. But we later find out that while his body is seemingly frozen or slumbering while trapped in ice, his mind or his willpower is still free to interact with the earth and people in it. I think that if we want to take these beings as all-powerful deities, whether he's chained right now or not, I think that whether it be through astral travel or some type of spirit body, even if he himself might be physically chained, if these gods can be said to still have a physical form, being a deity or, being a god, and especially a god of chaos and destruction, would on some level have a part of himself or even just his mind while he is chained still free to roam about and participate in the world, whether maybe not as an extreme of a level as he would like, or if he was fully unchained, but there's still that part of him that's able to come and go and interact with us. The second thing that I kind of wanted to get into is just my personal experiences and thoughts about working with Loki and why I personally choose to continue working with him, to the point where I guess in some of my pagan social circles, I might even have the reputation of being somewhat of a Lokian, and I think that's just because there are some circles of paganism and Norse paganism specifically where people don't work with Loki and maybe do see him as a destructive being and just someone that is intimidating, and the people don't really see if him just being this god of mischief, chaos, and destruction, what he would have to offer us that would be of any benefit. But since that time, I have not only led one small group ritual that was to Odin and Loki, but I've also led a group ritual which was devoted to the children of Angerboda and Loki. And if there is one thing that working with Loki has taught me, even as somewhat of a chaos switch, or just someone who does not really practice traditional structured witchcraft, if there's one thing that working with Loki and his energies has taught me, or just working with and trying to summon and call upon larger energies in general, it's that there can be certain benefits to doing things in especially group ritual, like casting a circle, especially as most of these rituals have taken place outside of my home and in strange or just new and different places. There have definitely been instances, such as right after I did that first ritual that I ever performed for Loki and Odin, where it was my first ever time doing a ritual, and not only was I just severely underprepared for it, but the weather was not cooperating at all, so I didn't really have a lot of time or space to prepare myself or this ritual space, physically or mentally. Naturally, chaos ensued. So it's definitely taught me the benefits of casting a circle for ritual purposes to kind of contain those chaotic energies, but it's also taught me to harness the power of Loki in order to achieve that end. It's my belief that if we look back at the Norse creation myth, where Odin and his brothers Vili and Ve stumble upon the pieces of driftwood and use it to create human beings, you will see arguments made, and I'm a proponent of this theory, that the other two of Odin's brothers might be Heimdall and being Vili, and that Ve might be Loki. And Ve, if we kind of break down what the meaning or the root of that word is, it can be said to be either a sacred fire or just the hallowing of a space. Setting aside a space and making it hallowed, making it sacred or holy. And so I will use Loki as that sacred fire, especially if you follow the belief, as I explained in my first video on him, that he is the child of Farbauti, the fierce striker, which could be lightning, and Laufey, or Leafy, who is also called needle, as in perhaps a pine needle, and that he is the fiery product born of lightning striking a tree. And I think that could, especially to the ancients, be seen as a form of sacred fire, because it is a fire that was created from these divine or unearthly, unhuman actions, and it is a fire which, if it's in a treetop, could be said to have the magical property of never having touched the ground. So when I went to lead my ritual to Angerboda and their children, I had learned from my previous experience, and I took a red candle with me to represent Loki as that sacred fire, and used him as Ve to create the circle around the ritual space and delineate that space. And to me it kind of makes sense, because Loki, in my mind, being a god of chaos, I often work with him in tandem with Odin, especially having a joint altar to the two of them, to balance out the order versus the chaos. And I also see ties to Loki through his counterpart Utgard Loki, or Logi, which is another form of fire, and perhaps an even more ancient and primordial version of fire. And to me it also reminds me of the ancient Vedic god Agni, which was a primordial Vedic god of fire. He is not only one of the oldest gods, but through Agni, aka through throwing offerings into the sacred fire or the ritual fire, it was believed that all other gods and deities would receive their offerings. So Loki is not only this fire from heaven, a lightning-struck tree, a flame not made by man, a divine flame, but he could also have a similar role. We know that Odin and Loki had a pact as blood brothers where Odin would never drink without Loki also drinking with him, and so perhaps that's a similar analogy to Agni being this fire god through which all other gods rely on to receive their offerings. Some of my other kind of modern UPGs, and this is just getting into my own personal views and perceptions and how I work with Loki. As a god of chaos, I also see him therefore being tied to things like probability and chance, and so I think he could also be said to, in that aspect, perhaps be a god of luck, and someone that I turn to not only to avoid chaos, but also perhaps give good luck should he feel so inclined. I often see him as being the cause of not like horrible accidents, but those little blunders or mishaps which can sometimes act as painful reminders for us to slow down and focus on what we're actually doing. But yeah, as one of his aspects as a chaos god, I think he can act as that kind of flip of the coin where it can either be a total disaster or you make it out by the skin of your teeth. As part of that kind of wild, mischievous, chaotic aspect, I have also started turning to Loki as kind of a chaotic god of modern electronics and technology. My husband works in IT and he repairs like broken computer equipment, so I would often joke that if anyone was going to be the god of his computer repair lab, it would probably be Loki. And especially with as finicky as technology can be, I think that he is also someone that you could perhaps pray to when your electronics are going haywire on you. I have had an experience where I came home from work one day and our power was out. So I decided to go to the Loki side of the altar and give an offering and just ask that perhaps if he's just gonna, be that god of chance and probability and that god of mishaps and circumstances like this, and especially being a god related to fire, I've often noticed that as a way to kind of mess with you or get attention, he will play with your ability to make fire, like losing lighters or matches not working, or just things not wanting to light. And so maybe that also relates to like fire, lightning, electricity. You know, all the pieces are there. So I went to my altar and I made him a little offering and I just asked that perhaps he could help make it so that our power would come back on sooner rather than later. And about 20 minutes go by and I kid you not, as soon as I came back into the living room and sat down on the couch, the lights came back on. So coincidence? I think not. In addition to that, I think that aside from Freya, in my personal day-to-day life and experience, Loki is also a big fan of what some call shuffleomancy, which is just using random songs that come on the radio or on your Spotify playlist or whatever it is to communicate with us. I don't really listen to music a lot except for when I'm driving in my car, and so then it usually is just random radio stations, and I will often just find that I'm going about my day, that a little song comes on the radio and just lyrics will make me think of Loki to the point that it just kind of makes me give a little chuckle and laugh to myself, and it's just kind of like a little ironic pick-me-up for my day. I believe there was also another instance where I wasn't really looking to like hex anybody or perform like black magic per se, but someone in the community was just going through a hard time and dealing with some people that they wanted to set boundaries with. So I just put on some Steve Miller Band and danced my way up to the Loki altar, which I think he enjoyed, being someone that enjoys letting loose and pushing us out of our comfort zones. So I danced my way up to the altar to Steve Miller Band and just kind of asked him to intervene and just maybe send a little mischief those people's way to get them out of my friend's hair. So along with Freya, I think in terms of pushing us out of our comfort zone and just enjoying when we kind of let loose and can be our most natural, playful, authentic selves, Loki definitely likes song and dance in terms of interactions and offerings in that form. I've also noticed that Loki tends to be the one that attracts the black sheep and the outsiders. You know, I'm definitely someone who always kind of grew up never feeling like they fit in anywhere, and kind of even amongst my own family, I just have different interests to a lot of the general public. I have a lot of just obscure, random, nerdy interests. I also had to move a lot growing up as a kid, which I think forced me to kind of adapt to different circumstances a lot growing up, and also become somewhat of like a social chameleon in order to fit in with the new social groups that I was interacting with. And I think that's also perhaps what might have drawn Loki to me, because unlike Odin and Freya, whom I sought out, I found that Loki just introduced himself to me, and I went along with the ride. So yeah, I often kind of see him as being someone that doesn't really fit in amongst the Aesir and is eventually shunned and outcast by them. He definitely tends to take in people that feel like outcasts or feel like the black sheep. And in addition to that, I definitely think that along with his daughter Hel, there is this almost nurturing side to Loki where he, don't get me wrong, he's going to be the one that will just casually walk into the room and flip the table over and upend your life and then just like stroll out and be like, "You're welcome." I think that for me, what I turned to him the most while I was going through the other side of my shadow work with Hel is that nurturing and healing the inner child, because as a trickster god or god of mischief, he does have that playful side to him, that irreverent side that I talked about in my last video, where he takes nothing seriously and kind of teaches us to do the same and to just not take everything so seriously all the time and to have fun with life. And I think that's definitely part of nurturing and healing our inner child, especially in like paganism and magical thinking and wanting to just connect with the natural world and connect with deity. It can often require us to really bring our walls down and view things with that childlike, innocent, imaginative mind. So Loki's really good at enabling us to free that side of ourselves. And we also, I think it's important to keep in mind that Loki is both a father and a mother in the Norse mythology. He not only has two trueborn sons with Sigyn, his Asgard wife, but he has his 3 children with Angerboda, and he also gave birth to Odin's horse Sleipnir while he was in the form of a female horse. Something I definitely learned early on was not to make too many jokes at Loki's expense about the whole Sleipnir incident, because you will get payback about it. But that's definitely one of the things that I think first and foremost Loki has to teach us, and where I say that even if you are not someone that wants to actually work with Loki or sees any benefit of working with him, or sees him just more as an evil or trickster figure, that's totally fine. I don't blame you for having that view of him. But I think even if you don't want to work with him, or that is your view of him, there are still lessons to be learned from his actions, and from many of the gods' actions, even if it's learning from their mistakes. First and foremost, I think Loki not only encourages that playfulness in us as a trickster god, but as part of the Odin, Vili, and Ve triad, Odin gave us breath, or the spark of life. Vili was said to give us will, or kind of our intelligence, our thinking mind, and Ve, or Loki, gave us our physical form. It said that he gave us his comely physical appearance. And I think that that was so that we can actually enjoy our lives on Midgard and our lives in physical form as humans on this earthly plane. And maybe what, in later Christian times, where Loki is has many of the same attributes of Satan, he is kind of that proponent of having fun in life and indulging in what might be called those Christian sins of the flesh. And by that I mean, things like gluttony, where I say, YOLO, you only live once, so eat whatever you want to eat. We're here in human form so that we can enjoy all that life has to offer. So everything in moderation, of course, but he definitely pushes us to enjoy those things. And perhaps being a trickster god or somewhat of a mischievous god or more of a childlike god, you definitely have to still be wary and keep your own mind about things. Loki, I think, can definitely push you to make those impulsive choices or act on impulse, but it's up to us to be rational and say, no, not today, Satan. That sounds like fun, but there are going to be actual consequences, so I'm not actually going to do that thing, because he will try to push you into those things. I think on the flip side of that, one of the big things that he teaches me is that along with the fact that the only constant is change, he teaches you to, not take it too seriously, to roll with those punches that life throws at us. And I think one of his mottos, especially that he drove home to me, is that life is a game. So if you're not having fun playing, what's the point? So what else do I do for Loki? As a kind of a god of chance and probability and tied to luck as I see him, one of my favorite things to do is there's the old adage of find a penny, pick it up, all day long you'll have good luck. So now whenever I find a lucky penny on the ground, I pick it up and I give it to Loki. In addition to that, being someone who kind of likes to indulge myself and has a sweet tooth, one of the things that I often share with Loki is candy and junk food. I especially think that as a deity with more of a sense of humor, I enjoy finding just like really crazy out there weird snacks and junk food and offering him that. Like, seriously, go offer Loki a Mountain Dew Code Red or like a weird flavor of Mountain Dew and see what he thinks of that. Because not only do I enjoy eating candy myself, but I think I just also enjoy sharing with him as someone who helps me with that inner child work and healing the inner child. He teaches us that it's okay to indulge in those things every now and then and to have fun every now and then. So I like to share that with him. In addition to that, the third thing that I offer him is herb, aka the green stuff, the ganja, some herbal refreshments. And I definitely have found that when I first started working with Loki, I would often joke that I only offered to him as kind of a form of appeasement, like paying off the mob so they won't bother you. I do think that offering him things like the Mary Jane, it has definitely been known to calm his ass down. There will be those days when you'll come home after just having a chaotic day and literally throw a Snickers at the altar to be like, damn it, Loki, calm the fuck down. You're not fun when you're hungry. Eat Snickers. Primarily, like I said, the things that in my modern practice I work with Loki on are healing the inner child, rolling with life's punches, that above all, know thyself and to thine own self be true. I think the to thine own self be true is definitely where it falls more like the Loki side of things. If I had to rank him in the like D&D scale, I would definitely put him in chaotic neutral, not chaotic evil, chaotic neutral, because it's my opinion that Loki does have his own moral code and his own sense of morality. It just doesn't adhere to society's or the Aesir's code of morality. He just makes up his own code and judges things based on that. I think overall, in Loki, as well as all of these other gods, just not only want us to know ourselves, as in, and to thine own self be true, but what I mean by that is that the gods just want us to be our most authentic selves, to discover what that most authentic self is, and then just be true to that self and be striving to be the best version of that self that we can be. even if you are not a fan of Loki, or you don't see any benefit in actually outright working with him, I think that there are still some takeaways and lessons that can be learned from him. I'm going to leave this video off there. I hope that it was fun and educational for you guys. I definitely really like talking about Loki now, which is probably why I've developed a reputation of being somewhat of a Lokian or a member of the Chaos crew, but we have fun here. So I hope that this helps to maybe change your mind or soften your stance somewhat on everyone's favorite Norse trickster god. And until next time, stay classy, pagans.